Hello again, Dr. Jimmy, and this is my third video. I'm making all one day, Friday the 10th of June. My third video in Horror Nights Who's Who. I've done Pazuzu, I've done Chats, and now it's time for Leatherface. And you may ask yourself, why do you need to tell us who Leatherface is? Don't we know who Leatherface is? Maybe, but which Leatherface do you know? Do you know all the Leatherfaces? Because there's one Leatherface, and yet every time he shows up, he's a different character, practically. So, who really is Leatherface? Well, it all goes back to Wisconsin. Wisconsin? Wisconsin. Back, I think, in the 1940s or 50s. I don't remember the exact dates. I should have researched it better. But there was a fellow named Ed Gein. Ed Gein was a bit, well, demented. And his mother had died, and he missed her a lot, and he wanted to bring her back. And so he sort of wanted to become his mother, sort of. Isn't that sound familiar? Yeah, there's a reason. But he didn't dress up in ladies' clothing to be his mother. He dressed up in ladies' skins. Yes, he'd kill girls, take their skins, and make a girl's suit and put it on. And then he thought he was his mother, and he'd be out cavorting in the nude. Well, not really nude, because he's covered with someone else's skin. You know, with breasts and everything, dancing around in the moonlight, thinking that Mum was back. But he was also really, really out of his freaking mind, if that wasn't enough. Because sometimes he didn't even realize he was killing girls. Sometimes he thought he was killing deer. He thought he was killing deer and then skinning and dressing them up and smoking and eating the meat and cannibalistically enjoying flesh that he thought was eating venison when he was actually eating one of your neighbors. Oh my God. Oh, he was quite bonkers, a complete and utter loony. And when the police finally caught up with him, because, you know, being a bit out of his mind, you get sloppy. He's not one of those careful, crafty serial killers that covers his tracks. He was no Dexter. Oh, no. No. Didn't have any of all that plastic wrap and rubber gloves and careful not to get anything on you. No. Careful not to kill people you know, only killing strangers. None of that sort of thing. No, he was slop pickers. He was crazy. So he got caught, and when they found him, they found all sorts of horrible things in his house. You know, he'd build furniture and things out of, you know, femurs and rib cages and sort of things, and artifacts for the house out of bits and, you know, pieces of skin and bone from human victims. They found, I'm not kidding, a bowl of noses on his kitchen table. A bowl of noses. What was that? Like party mix? You know, like you'd have a bowl of Fritos. Oh, nice nose. And, rather morbid. So, Ed Gein, however, this rather sensational story of this demented lunatic of Wisconsin, mind you, Wisconsin. Funny, that's one of John Murray's code words. Anyway, Ed Gein inspired not one, not two, but 3 different fictional killers in horror fiction and movies. First of all, that whole thing about Mum might have reminded you of Norman Bates. Of course it did. Norman Bates is based on Ed Gein. The whole part about missing Mum and wanting to make her come back to life, Robert Bloch took that idea from Ed Gein, only he made Norman, this nice fellow living in California, not Wisconsin, who was really strongly attached to his mother, and the whole taxidermy hobby, he took that as well. And so he keeps Mum as a stuffed thing in the basement, but also puts on her dress and wig and becomes Mother, right? And, you know, or he took some of that from Ed Gein, was inspired by that. And of course Hitchcock made the movie, and the rest is history. We all know about Norman Bates today. There's even a new TV show, Bates Motel, right? Now, another one, more recently, Thomas Harris wrote the novel Silence of the Lambs. It was actually the second novel in his stories about Hannibal Lecter. And this one, Hannibal Lecter helps Clarice Starling of the FBI solve a case. And there's a killer they call Buffalo Bill because he skins his humps. Well, actually, turns out to be a fellow named Jamie Gum who wants to become a woman, a sort of transsexual. Now, of course, this caused a lot of controversy when they made the movie because the LGBTQ community, how many letters do they add on to that nowadays? I don't know. I just always said gay, but they added all these letters on, and everybody is part of this big community, and none of them are actually community at all. I'm sorry, but enough of that political discourse. But transgendered people in particular thought that made them look bad. Well, you know, one lunatic can be anything. I mean, it's just as bad to say that there can be no lunatics who are transgendered. That means that's just as wrong. I mean, if a person who's not trans, what is the word, cisgendered? I don't know all the terminology, but a person who is not can go crazy. Well, why can't they go crazy? Anyone can go crazy. Anyone can be a lunatic. That's the joy of it. So it's not really saying that they're all crazy. That one was crazy. Jamie Gumb was crazy. Jamie Gumb wanted to be a woman, and so made a girl suit, right? Remember, wanted to get skins that were just perfect so he could put the girl suit on. Remember all that dancing, you know, and I won't reenact a dance number. That's disturbing enough. But remember, it puts the lotion on its skin. Remember all of that? Yeah. So that was also inspired by Ed Gein, who also did something similar, but for different reasons. It was his mum he was trying to. He didn't believe he wasn't actually transgendered. Ed Gein was not transgendered. No. So that was at least not in any normal sense of the word. So that's where Jamie Gumb came from. And of course that was used in the movie Silence of the Lambs for Hannibal Lecter, right. But the third one, or actually the second one, was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Remember, inspired by real life, except the real life was a fellow in Wisconsin, not Texas, who never used a frickin' chainsaw except maybe to chop wood, and didn't use it for killing anyone. So it was quite different. But they took some of the ideas from Ed Gein, including the cannibalism, and used that for Leatherface. So Leatherface, Norman Bates, Jamie Gumb, all inspired by Ed Gein. Interesting. But Leatherface himself seems to be different versions of him every time they make a film. In the very first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the one the house is based on, we don't even know his real name. It's never mentioned once in the film. We know that he is part of a family in Texas. Their parents are dead, but there's at least two other brothers, the hitchhiker and the barbecue cook. We know that, and their names aren't given either, although in later films they'll be called Drayton and Nubbins Sawyer, and Leatherface will be called Bubba Sawyer, but not then. In the first film we don't know his name. We know his parents are gone. We know that Grandpa looks like he's dead and stuffed, taxidermy style, but actually he's still alive, over 100 years old. Horrible Grandpa, scary. Yes, I'm sure he'll be in the house too. What happens? Well, of course the family seems to belittle and almost bully or even abuse Leatherface. Even though he's massive, huge and powerfully strong, he's almost like a child man, a sort of big baby. Gunnar Hansen actually said Leatherface is just a big baby. He can't speak properly. He only makes high-pitched noises, like maybe he's got a cleft palate. We don't know. We can't see his face. There must be some disfigurement that keeps him from speaking, and he seems to be mentally challenged. Is he mentally retarded? We don't know. In one of the films they say, oh no, he's just different. But that's also a euphemism for something. There seems to be some sort of neurodegenerative syndrome. At least he's more childlike and innocent, and some sort of developmental disorder, so that he's not, you know, a functioning adult and has to be taken care of by the other members of his family, apparently. He also misses his mum terribly, and he hides his face under face masks he makes out of his victim's skin, and of course the whole family are cannibals. But in one significant scene, he actually paints lipstick and puts on a wig to fulfill the role of mother in the dinner, because mother's been dead, and so now he's going to take mom's place temporarily. So there's a little bit of cross-dressing there, although he doesn't actually put on a dress, I don't think, in the first movie, but there is a little bit of that in the first movie implied, again borrowing from Ed Gein. Now, in the second movie, which didn't come out till years later, 1986, from 1974 to 1986, 12 years later, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. That one, they actually give him a name. Now the name of the family is Sawyer. The cook is Drayton Sawyer. The hitchhiker, who's now dead, was Nubbin Sawyer. There's another brother named Choctop, although that can't be his real first name. He was in Vietnam and he has a plate in his head. And he replaces the hitchhiker for all intents and purposes. And Leatherface is called Bubba Sawyer, although Bubba is a nickname, it means brother. So maybe we don't even know his real first name. And they're similar to the way they were portrayed in the first movie, but now they're in Houston or somewhere, hiding out in an amusement park. It's all quite weird, and they're being chased down by a Texas Ranger who's after them because they killed one of his daughter or something. But it seems more like the original character, and probably because Tobe Hooper directed it. Although this film, he went all out camp, and it became much more of a comedy, a dark comedy, than the first one, which was more balls to the wall horror. You know, there were some comic elements in the first one, but much more. The second film was almost like a comedy with some horror elements, basically. You know, it got rather silly at the end, especially. But then they brought back him again in Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, where they had the Saws family. And here they changed the character quite a bit. He's much more macho, much more bigger, more masculine, less likely to put on lipstick, much more likely to be less likely to be bossed around by his family. He even seems to have a family of his own, including a daughter. Illegitimate daughter. Is it a product of rape? We don't really know. It's implied. We don't know for certain. So that changed the character again. But again, his name is still Bubba Sawyer. Now, years later, in the early 90s, they came up with yet another version. This was going to be called the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know what the original title was going to be, but it ended up being Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. And they actually threw the film away for a while, but then made some more scenes and released it when two of the people who were in the movie became really famous. What's her name? Zellweger. What's her first name? I forget. But, you know, she won Academy Awards. And, of course, the guy in those Lincoln commercials, you know, McConaughey, yes, Matthew McConaughey. And, of course, those are movies they want to forget they ever made. And this one shows more of the family. And I guess McConaughey's yet another brother. I think his name is Vilmer. And there's another one, Alfredo, in the previous one. So there's all kinds of other brothers of this family popping up now and then. But in this one, Leatherface is a full-out drag queen. Not so much, a little bit it was implied in the first movie, but this one, he's a full-out drag queen with nylon stockings and you know, bras and fake boobs, doing the whole female get-out. And there's some connection, bizarrely, to some sort of Illuminati cult and maybe even extraterrestrials. It gets really freaking weird. It goes into David Lynch surrealness, and it's just the weirdest of all the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. Tobe Hooper had nothing to do with it, and a lot of people want to pretend it never existed. So that's the weirdest version of Leatherface ever. Then, of course, they rebooted it in the 21st century. They made the remake, reboot, and a prequel. Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning. That was, what, 2003 or something? Or 2004, 2005? I forget. It was before they brought them in, and they used those as basis for the house in 2007 for Horror Nights at Carnival of Carnage. And that was a completely different Leatherface altogether. This one had been the illegitimate son of a woman named Sloan who worked at a meatpacking camp. And she died in childbirth, and the guy who owned the Blair Meats threw the baby away in the rubbish. But Edna Mae Hewitt, I think her name is, took the baby home and raised it as Thomas Brown Hewitt. Completely different name, right? Completely different character. And this little baby grows up to become Leatherface, and he's got some horrible disfigurement in his face, some sort of tumors, and it causes him to not speak correctly, and he also has some mental development problems, and he gets abused by the other children who pick on him and beat him up, but his mother stands and defends him. "You aren't going to mess with my boy!" Right. And he gets raised by a huge extended family, including a dad and a mum and uncles and cousins, and they're all there together, and they want to, and they're all supportive of him. You don't have the abuse you have in the other films. You know, he may still be a bit simple in some ways, but he's strong as an ox, and he's a loved member of this family of insane, murderous, homicidal cannibals. And that's how he gets raised. And that's who we see in these two films. Completely different character, different name, everything. But it's not the Leatherface we're getting. We're also not getting the drag queen. We're getting the original from 1974. We might call him Bubba Sawyer, I guess. Now, there's a couple more versions of Leatherface besides those. Just a couple years ago, they released Texas Chainsaw 3D. This one goes back to the original character, except it's not Bubba Sawyer, it's Jedidiah Sawyer. It's supposed to be a sequel from the original films, although it ignores the next generation, I think part 3 as well. He's never been married, never had kids of his own. He's living on his own in the house by himself. Doesn't even look like the same house, you know. Other people come along. He turns out to become the hero at the end of the film. They sort of make him, you know, a more sympathetic character than he ever was. Not so much an evil character at all. And he goes after bad people, and the good people get spared because they're related to him. You know, sort of family, right? So the family values thing is exemplified. Very different from the one we saw before. And coming up this year will be a film called Leatherface, which will be another prequel. And it's going to retcon everything. Now his name is Jackson Sawyer. And all we know about him so far is that he's in a mental institution as a teenager, and he escapes. And somehow after he escapes from the mental institution, he ends up becoming part of that family and becomes the Leatherface we all love and know. But he starts out as a crazy boy who has been locked up in a mental institution somewhere. That's Jackson Sawyer. So there's all these different Leatherfaces. We have Bubba Sawyer, we have Jedidiah Sawyer, we have Jackson Sawyer, we have Thomas Hewitt, and then we have, you know, other versions of Bubba Sawyer, one that's more comedy, one that's complete drag queen, one that's a family man with his own kids. And the original from 1974 was quite different. All these different versions. So which Leatherface is Leatherface? Or are they all Leatherface? After all, how many Draculas have we had? We've had the Bela Lugosi, we've had the Christopher Lee, we've had countless versions, the Gary Oldman version, we've had cartoon versions, Hotel Transylvania, we've had Grandpa Munster, we've had all these different Draculas, but it's all Dracula, right? It's still Dracula himself. So it's the same with Leatherface. He's become a classic monster, sort of. He can be utilized in many different ways and different interpretations of the character. So many different ones. Freddy Krueger is always just Freddy Krueger. There's only been 2 versions of that, really, the original and the remake. But we all know Freddy Krueger as one thing, pretty much. Likewise with most of these sort of characters. But Leatherface seems to have transcended that, and you can have all these different characters that are all still Leatherface, because all you need is the leather face mask, a chainsaw, and a taste for some Texas chili that includes a rather special ingredient. Anyway, the version we're getting is the original from the original film in 1974. But aspects of those others might influence it. I don't know. We haven't seen the house yet. But it's good to know then who Leatherface exactly is, because it all goes back, really, not to Texas but Wisconsin, and a crazy man named Ed Gein, about 50 years ago, or actually longer than that, 60 years ago, whose depravity inspired all sorts of wonderful nightmares that we enjoy to this day. So this concludes Horror Nights Who's Who for Leatherface. And I don't know if I'll need to make any more of these. It depends if there's anything that people might be perplexed about or have questions about when more stuff gets announced. I really don't need to do a who's who for The Walking Dead. We all know what that is. We've seen it 5 times already, or we will see it 5 times this year. Good God. So there we go then. Till next time, enjoy the rest of your life, as long or short as it might be.